So Stein wrote a lot of prose about writing about writing, no surprise there, in various forms. And I just thought it would be, I don't know if it'll be fun, but it'll be interesting, stimulating, maybe educational for us to go through some of her statements. One on narrative, one on noun, one on repetition, and one on composition. Let's see if we can make some sense, some Steinian sense out of these. Let's take narrative first. She says, I think one naturally is impressed by anything having a beginning, a middle, and an ending when one is emerging from adolescence. It's kind of a snarky statement, isn't it? American writing has been an escaping, not an escaping, but an existing within, with the necessary feeling of one thing succeeding another thing, of anything having a beginning and a middle and an ending. What's she saying about narrative?
If you're going to write in a way that's supposed to, in some way, replicate or represent life, you can't give narrative this A, B, C, D, you know.
Because life isn't lived
narratively.
Well,
life isn't lived narratively, but more importantly, I mean, because I guess life technically sort of does go with a progression of time. You do get older.
It's a progression that we impose upon it as a fiction that will suffice to explain our lives.
But memory doesn't work that way, I don't think. If we think about someone like Lynn Heginian, who's going to write her life...
Another Chapter 9 poet.
Not in a linear sense. She's going to write it the way she remembers it, as she remembers it, with those associations from one event to another created by associations, you know, like think of like the color of her bedroom and then the color of, you know, maybe flowers in a field where she would go with
which
her,
are two
different
disconnected memories that if you set them together seem like a sequence of a life, but in fact aren't a sequence. They aren't a sequence in memory, and I would insist they weren't a sequence in life, particularly at that point. If a noun is a name of anything, why after a thing is named, write about it. A name is adequate or it is not. Things, once they are named, does not go on doing anything to them, and so why write in nouns? Nouns are the name of anything, and just naming names is all right when you want to call a roll, but is it good for anything else? Dave, what do you think she means by that? That's pretty powerful stuff. I mean, because the world, our linguistic world, is organized around nouns a lot.
I think it's not descriptive. A noun already carries the description with it. Once it's been named, you already have that understanding, that meaning. So if you want to really describe something, you have to approach it differently. If she wanted to describe a carafe, again, she would do it differently.
And when she says roll call, she's willing, almost jokingly, to accept the utility of nouns in a roll call. What kind of nouns is she talking about there, particularly?
Maybe a person's name.
Yeah, proper noun. Proper noun. Anna. So Anna. So did you choose the name Anna?
No.
Okay, so you were given Anna, you're Anna. When you hear Anna, Pavlovian-like, you respond. If there are 4 Annas in the room and someone says Anna, 4 people turn around. There's really no getting out of that. It's in you. You've been languaged from the start. Anna is an arbitrary and capricious, not consultative, undemocratic noun that got applied to you. But Anna-ness gets created in other ways. If you question every noun the way Gertrude Stein, at least at this moment, was questioning the name, you begin to wonder about nouns. So she believes in the determinism of the noun. Can someone say something about the relationship that she stresses between the word and the thing that's different from traditional notions of word-thing relationships? Who wants to give that a try?
Well, she's not doing the word thing. She's doing the word work.
Say more.
So if you think about the relationship between, you know, we're going with mug. Because
Mug.
that's mug. So that's mug.
This is
Determinately.
That's yes.
But mug also has all of these other... if this was a Stein poem, this doesn't have to be mug.
She's going to liberate it. She's going to
liberate
liberate the word. So what's happening here is that she sees a word-thing relationship, thing in the world, not worded, not languaged, right? Word-thing. And she wants to see it as like a word-word relationship, because once this thing becomes a word as a noun, it gets put into language and is a word. We don't have it anymore. We just have mug. I'm hiding it. We have mug. Mug, mug. So she wants to replace word-thing relationships, which in language aren't really things, with word-word relationships. That's really important. Let's talk about repeating. As I was saying, loving, repeating, being is in a way earthly being. In some, it is repeating that gives to them always a solid feeling of being. In some children, there's more feeling and in repeating, eating, and playing. And in some, in storytelling, and they're feeling more and more in living as growing young men and women and grown men and women in their middle living. More, there's middle living. You're moving from adolescence to middle living. More and more, there comes to be in them differences in loving, repeating, in different kinds of men and women. There comes to be in some more and in some less loving, repeating. Loving, repeating is a going on always in them of earthly being, etc., etc. How do you create difference in repeating? We think of repeating as the same, but in fact, how is it different when you repeat? Theoretically speaking.
Well, maybe we could think about Duchamp in this sense. If he in like, let's say, New Descending the Staircase, he repeats different forms, but in a slightly different context, in a slightly more fractured
perspective,
way.
From a slightly different perspective.
So you get a different, maybe, feeling, or you get a different kind of angle on what is the same shape.
And presenting it simultaneously.
And in succession.
Yes, that's really well said. So this has a lot to do with Cubism, though it goes beyond it. So she turns and torques and twists things. Hemingway, in his very early prose, in a book like In Our Time, described Nick Adams going camping by a river, opening a can, doing this. He did this, he did that, he did this, he did that. It's almost like Frank O'Hara, the Chapter 8 poet. He did this, he did that, he did this, and it's this slight movement, a kind of repetitive, multi-perspectival repetition of doing. She wants us to remember there's a relationship. All word-thing relationships are relationship. So she likens it to a word-word relationship. It is essentially a copulative relationship. It's a relationship that generates. And the more she circles around in a New Descending a Staircase kind of way, or even a Nick Adams kind of way, the more, or a Frank O'Hara kind of way, the more we circle around and find all kinds of views of a relationship, the more multiple and meaningful and various that relationship is, so that repetition is always a difference. What Gertrude Stein is showing us is the effort at trying to get it right, to repeat this way, try it that way, try it this way, take 5, take 100. And so she's willing essentially to show us all the approaches. All right, let's conclude by talking about composition. She wrote an absolutely terrific piece of prose called Composition as Explanation. And we're looking at a very brief couple of paragraphs, and I'm only going to pick out a very small part of that small part and ask you what you make of it. The composition is the thing seen by everyone living in the living they are doing. They are composing of the composition that at the time they are living is the composition of the time in which they are living. All right, what are we going to do with that? Very important.
Maybe the idea we were talking before about how everyone is educated into a linguistic community, and that's not something just natural. Language is not a natural phenomenon. It's culturally coded, it's socially agreed upon. And so in that way, she's saying that everyone is the maker of the reality in which they live.
Linguistically.
Linguistically, yeah.
The composition is the thing seen by everyone living in the living they are doing. It sounds almost Sid Corman-esque or Dickinsonian in the way that the hand that is writing, maybe that's Niedecker too, the hand that is composing the self is doing it now. Composing is living. Let's go around and get some final words on this. The composition is the thing seen by everyone living in the living they are doing. They are the composing of the composition that at the time they are living is the composition of the time in which they are living. That last part seems to make some claims about writing as a historical record. So, who wants to start with this? Just say anything briefly. Dave, what's your thinking?
I feel like she's saying that nobody is a bystander to what's going on, including language. Words are not just there. They don't mean just things. They actually have something to do with what's going on around them.
Terrific. Max?
There's an interesting... her choice of the word composing composition I find is very interesting because a composition we think of as something that has been composed, that is finished. But at the same time, we also think of the act of composition. And so she's sort of collapsing that distinction between the product and the process, and that everything is always sort of coming into being. We are always composing the composition.
Great. Molly, your thought?
And when she writes, they are the composing of the composition, it makes me think each person is composing his or her own composition and our ways of, building and understanding our world. And then each one of those lives is part of a larger composition that encompasses everything.
One almost thinks that one can live an artful life because if one is self-consciously composing one's living and realizes that others are composing their living, then together we form a kind of collective composing. One can almost live artfully. It's a very interesting and idealistic thought, I think.